Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Jeopardize, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the iPhone. The iPhone 14 to be precise. The Apple event took place a few days ago and they released the AirPods Pro, the 3 new Apple Watches, and also the iPhone 14, 14 Plus, the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. But in this episode we're solely going to be focusing on the 14 iPhone. We're going to be solely focusing on the iPhone 14 series. I've already explained the lineup, but if you want to listen to the AirPods Pro and the Apple Watches, go listen to my podcast Jeopardize, same name. It's on Spotify and many other platforms. The link will also be in the description. So let's get on with the 14 lineup. I've explained the 14 lineup, how it goes: the 14, 14 Plus, 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max. Now on to the first, we'll talk about the 14 Pro Plus and the 14. So the main difference between the 14 and the 14 Plus is the screen size and the weight. So 14 has around 6.1 inches of display, while the 14 Plus has around 6.7 inches of display. You have the Super Retina, etc. HDR display, but the 14 weighs around 172 grams while the 14 Plus weighs around 203. The display, you have HDR, True Tone, 800 nits of maximum brightness on a typical setting, but up to 1200 nits of peak brightness on an HDR settings. You have IP68 water and dust resistant. You have the A15 Bionic chip that they used last year in the iPhone 13 Pro. Now to the camera, you have dual camera setup. The both of them are 12 megapixels. One is your main sensor and the other is the ultra wide sensor, which has around 120 degrees field of view. You also have something called the photonic engine, which helps in low light photography, and you also have something called the True Tone flash, which depending on the distance will provide you the amount of flash. So the intensity of the flash will depend on how distant or how far away your subject is, which is very cool. You can shoot up to 4K, up to 60 FPS. You have cinematic mode of 4K at 30 FPS, HDR recording with Dolby Vision. You also have an action mode which stabilizes your camera movement. Of that, you have 2.8K up to at 60 FPS. You also have quick take video, stabilization, audio zoom, True Tone flash, like I said, etc. You have stereo recording and that. But the main change they've bought, which is completely different from the iPhone 13, is the True Depth selfie camera. So the selfie camera is a normal 12 megapixel sensor. You have the photonic engine, but it has autofocus with this new technology called True Depth camera, and this same thing will be used for facial recognition. You can also shoot 4K up to 60 FPS, HDR with Dolby Vision, and you have slow-mo video support at 1080 up to 120 FPS. Now also something very interesting you have is the the battery. You have up to 26 hours of video playback on the 14 Plus. You also have a bit bigger battery in the 14 and 14 Plus, up to 20 hours of video playback on the 14. You also have something called the satellite emergency thing. So you don't have a SIM tray. That's the main thing. And you have something called the emergency SOS, also the crash detection. So I'm going to explain it one by one. First, we'll go by the emergency SOS. So let's say you're away from your cell towers, you're away from cell service and Wi-Fi. iPhone will let you text your emergency contacts and emergency services via a satellite. It also has crash detection. So if you heard my podcast on the Apple Watch and the AirPods Pro, the Apple Watches have crash detection. So it uses a bunch of sensors and accelerometers and 3-axis gyrometer to guess basically if you're in a severe car crash, and it will automatically trigger an emergency SOS SOS if you don't respond. Also, they've removed the SIM tray from the phone. So basically they're telling you to use an eSIM. So eSIM makes things simple. You can activate your new iPhone or add carriers digitally. So basically no physical SIM card that we have a SIM tool to open a SIM tray, put in the SIM and put it back again. But you don't need to do that. You can add carriers digitally, and eSIM cannot be removed if your iPhone is lost or stolen, which is very good as well. The iPhone 14 is in, I suppose, 14 and 14 Plus is in 5 colors: the midnight, purple, starlight, product red, and blue. Now we move on to the main attraction, because to be honest, there's a very few minor changes in the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus that is different from the iPhone 13. The main changes that have been brought onto the phones are the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. Now, let's talk about the normal specs. You can go up to 1 TB of storage in the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. I think that is not possible in the 14 Plus. Now you have the same screen setup. You have a 6.1 inch in the Pro, a 6.7 inch in the Pro Max. But here's the mind-boggling thing for me: both are extremely heavy. The iPhone 14 Pro weighs around 206 grams, while the Pro Max weighs around 240 grams, which is a lot. You have always on display. You have a ProMotion technology with adaptive refresh rates up to 120 Hertz. So what this does is that if you're on a static screen, if you're on an idle screen, the refresh rate will go down all the way to 1 Hertz, which will also enable your always on display. So the screen is basically refreshing 1 time per second, not 120 times per second, which is 120 Hertz. So all the way down to 1 Hertz. On the previous model, it was up all the way down to 10 Hertz, which so this basically saves up a lot of battery life. Now, I talked about the screen, 6.1, 6.7. You have Super Retina XDR display. You have 1000 nits max brightness on a typical setting, 1600 nits of peak brightness on HDR settings, and 2000 nits of peak brightness if you're outdoor, which is really great. Now you have IP68 splash water and dust resistant. You have the new A16 Bionic chip with a 6-core CPU, a 5-core GPU, and a 16-core neural engine. Now the big bump up is in the camera. Now they have a triple camera setup, 48 megapixel. Yes, Apple with 48 megapixel, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 12 megapixel 2x telephoto and 3x telephoto. You can shift between those two, but the 48 megapixel is the main one. It's enabled by the quad pixel sensor, so it helps with the zooming in and etc. So 48 megapixel, but it's basically a 12 megapixel. It takes the picture in 12 megapixels, but as you zoom in, it increases the resolution. It also has the photonic engine. You can shoot at 4K up to 60. You have cinematic mode, action mode, HDR with Dolby Vision, macro video recording. You have ProRes video recording up to 4K at 30 FPS. You also have stereo recording and the same true depth camera as in the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus, though, which also helps in your facial recognition. Now onto the battery. The Pro Max, the 14 Pro Max has around 29 hours of battery, while the Pro has around 23 hours of battery. Now they've also removed the SIM tray and everything like that. Now, this is really interesting. You also have, you don't have the SIM tray in this, but they've done something called the dynamic island, which is something new. And this dynamic island is this kind of a pill kind of thing, and it's just so interesting. The dynamic island is what they're calling it. It's a pill kind of notch. So they've removed the notch, and it acts as a very different, it acts as if it's multitasking. If the phone is multitasking, so let's say you're in FaceTime and listening to music, that doesn't really make sense, but let's say you're waiting for your cab and you're FaceTiming. So what it actually does, the pill enlarges into this small notification kind of bar, and it shows you where your Uber is or where you're going, but it does it in such fluid movements that it's really great. So this is how it looks, and it looks very awesome, to be honest. This is what they're showing on their website. Now, if I talk about prices, this is going to be very I wouldn't know what to say. It's pretty expensive. Now, if I go to the pricing over here, I think the iPhone 14 Pro, here it is, you get, I think it's more than $1,100. Yeah, okay, the 14 Pro Max is around $1,099. The 14 Pro is $999. If I go to the 14, let's see, this is the major difference. I really love dynamic island, and they've named it so well. It's very beautiful, to be honest. It's very good looking, the dynamic island, because they've removed the notch. They're not like, okay, we no notch, let's put a hole punch. They're not like normal people. iPhone, to be honest, Apple, to be honest. So the 14 is around $800, and the 14 Plus is around $900, and it's available 14 from 16th September. So this is the main feature of the iPhone, the dynamic island, and to be honest, it's really great. It's lovable, to be honest. I think you can it grows on you, I suppose. Even if you don't like it at first, it grows on you. The notch definitely doesn't. It's grown enough. So that is it for this episode. The iPhone 14, I will have definitely the 14 series. I will definitely have many more videos up and coming. Stay tuned for those. I'll see you later. Have a good day. Keep on watching Jeopardize. Goodbye.